Hey everybody, this is Gail, and this is the inaugural video for my new vlog about crochet that I am calling errata-hate, because puns. So the point of errata-hate, at least insofar as I have sort of come up with a general point, is to provide reviews on patterns and books and tools that I personally use, and to also explain techniques that I use to make stuff. I make a lot of garments, and actually rarely use patterns to make certain garments. So I've sort of come up with a series of ways that I make things that I think would be interesting for people to know about. I'm always sort of pushing myself to try new techniques and do new variations on stuff. So I'm really hoping that what happens with this whole vlog is that it becomes a good repository of information for, you know, patterns that you can trust, and tools you might be interested in, and also just tips and tricks from how I sort of kludge my projects together. So for this inaugural episode, what I actually want to concentrate on is designing patterns. And I don't mean figuring out how to size stuff or how many rows you need for something. What I'm talking about specifically is the design of the pattern you're writing, the layout of the pattern, the style of the pattern. And I want to provide some tips on how to make a pattern that's going to be readable by most people. Now, you're probably wondering why I want to start out with this topic, and the short answer is I'm a technical writer. In my day job, I get to get really pedantic about design and layout and instructions, and I'm very, very good at what I do, and I'm very passionate about what I do, and I see a lot of patterns that are good patterns that have a lot of promise, and that could be really cool stuff, but the pattern layout and design itself makes it difficult to use the pattern. So I just want to run you through a few tips. I've got them all written down over here, so if you see me glancing over there, it's because I'm looking at my notes. So the first thing we need to talk about is that you need to keep pretty mellow on your font choices. I have seen some patterns that produce really great final results, but the pattern is hard to read because people use handwriting fonts, or they switch fonts, or they use colors that don't read well, and you really just need to keep it simple. You need to remember you're creating a pattern for other people to use, and you don't know if the person who wants to use your pattern may have difficulty reading a handwriting font, or might not actually see a color you're using to denote something. So, you know, you've got to consider you might be dealing with people who are colorblind, or people who are vision impaired. And it's really important to me also because, like, you get a nice clean look if you choose just a heading font and a body font, and just don't get fancy with it. You know, the goal of a pattern is to make it easier for people to make your project. So the goal of your pattern at the end is to have people who can easily make your project based off your instructions, and have a lovely piece of crochet that they, you know, are proud to give away, or want to wear, or, you know, can use for whatever its purpose. I've just started doing kitchen towels like crazy, so I'm sort of thinking in general. Patterns for everything. So the other thing you can do, besides keeping your font choices pretty simple and clean, is don't fuck around with color. Don't do colored backgrounds on shit. Don't change colors of different parts of your pattern for no reason. If you do have notes in your pattern, I do think it's a very good idea to color code just the word note. Do not color code the entire note, but definitely, if you're having notes in your pattern, make sure the word note stands out, and then leave the note body itself in your standard body font. It will bring attention to itself without causing difficulty to understand it, because suddenly you're changing colors or fonts or something. I have had a number of times where I've downloaded a pattern. You know, I've bought it because it looks interesting, the finished project looks interesting. I download the pattern, and it's colors and it's boxes, and I can't really understand where I'm starting, where I'm ending. I've had times where people have used text boxes to bring attention to stuff, and the bottom of the text box has cut off part of the instruction. And if you want to use a text box because you need to bring special attention to something like a special stitch, just proof it. Go down and look at the whole thing and look at the bottom and make sure that all your words are there. So, easy to read font choices. Don't fuck around with colors. Use good spacing. I think it is incredibly important that for every row or round that you have people working, that there is a space between each row or round instruction. And I'm sure that a few of you are going, well, duh, that's really basic. I see it so much, though. I see so many people who write a pattern and they cram it all together. And it can make it very difficult to follow along with instructions, especially if you're doing something like multiple increases. So if you're doing, round 2, you increase every 5, round 3 every 6, etc. It can be very difficult to keep up with where you are. It makes the pattern less helpful to not have appropriate spacing. And I'm now going to give you a big list of stuff that I think every pattern should have. You should have a list of every stitch you're using. Chain stitch, single crochet, double crochet, crocodile stitch. You should have a hook size. You should have yarn recommendations. And you don't need a whole huge list of yarn recommendations, but 2 recommendations, I would say. Maybe a nice yarn that you use to make it, but also something a little less expensive. The other big thing is, if there is a yarn that you have tried that doesn't work with your pattern, I think it's incredibly important to let people know that. I found out the hard way that a hat pattern I designed does not work with Red Heart. I don't know why. It doesn't work with Super Saver at all. Like, the hat comes out weird shaped, and it doesn't fit correctly, and I don't know what happened. I literally cannot figure out, but I know for certain that Red Heart Super Saver does not work with that pattern. And the other one, let them know if you're using American or British terms. This is an option. If you post your pattern on Ravelry, you can say which terms, and please use them. I had to frog an entire project once because the American or British terms box was empty, and until I got to the next to last round of the pattern, it all read like regular, not regular, but American terms. And on the next to last round, there was a half treble, and I thought, that's not a fuck. And I said way more than that, but I think that brings the emphasis. And the last thing, if you're using a special stitch, like a crocodile stitch or a shell stitch, you're not required to write the explanation about how to create that stitch. And I say this as someone who hates writing the explanations of how to create a stitch. You can link to YouTube videos, you can just name the stitch, you can provide a link to a website that shows how to do the stitch. As someone who hates writing out special stitch instructions, I just really want to encourage all pattern writers who are kind of getting going to really think about embracing the fact that, there's a YouTube tutorial or there's a website that shows that. And, if someone gets a hold of you at some point and says, this resource doesn't exist anymore, update your pattern. Find a new resource, update the pattern. So those are my tips for creating good patterns. Keep your font choices simple, don't fuck around with color, please space, list all the attributes of your pattern, stitches, hook size, yarn recommendations, American or British terms, and don't be afraid to use outside sources to help people understand how to make your project. So that will do it for this episode of Errata-hate. I'm going to go and try to film one more episode right now just to encourage myself to keep going. So I will see you guys